Good morning. Good morning. My name is Tom Rogers. I'm on the board of the Groundwater Council. And I have the very distinct pleasure to introduce this wonderful panel today for a fascinating discussion. I think there's probably a reason why, if you look at the schedule with the left-hand side, there's probably a reason for that. But anyway, this panel is going to aim to discuss how Rhode Island can meet its areas of act on the climate goals while supporting municipalities in their climate resiliency needs to ensure that communities can adapt to the impacts of climate change. I'd really like to welcome Deputy Majority Leader Representative Lauren Carson from District 75, represents Newport, but also serves on the House Environmental and Natural Resources Council. Also, Sheila Dormody, Director of Climate and Scenic Programs for the Nature Conservancy. Rubinoff from the Coastal Manager of Rhode Island Sea Grant and Florida Coastal Research Center. And Chuck Horbert, who's the Deputy Administrator for Groundwater and Freshwater Wetlands Protection at the Rhode Island PDM. So with that, I'm really excited to hear our panelists continue. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Carson. I'm State Representative for the great city of Newport, Rhode Island, and it's my pleasure to be here today. So I'm going to open up this panel. We're going to have to take questions at the end. We have built that in. But I'm going to just start off by asking a few questions of the audience, and that is, what do you think the Act on Climate does? Everybody know? Sir?
I what the Act on Climate does clearly is it establishes enforceable goals for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. That's the key things it does. And it broadens the scope of what it needs to be done in that context.
Thank you.
So for example, it includes food systems as well as other things. So that's essentially what it does. Before that, the goals were unenforceable and hence relatively meaningless.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that? Because the Act does a lot of other things. And so what I'd like to talk about today is dig in a little bit to the Act and talk about some of the goals inside the Act that we don't need to make sure are implemented over the next 28 years. I was the prime sponsor of the bill in the House. It passed both houses in 2021 and was signed into law in April of 2021, which was a huge achievement, not only for myself, but all the people, some of you in this room, who contributed to getting that bill over the finish line. So that is correct. The major goal of the Act is to reduce carbon to zero in 28 years. Lots of the opposition has argued right up till today that we're going to force people to buy electric cars, that we're going to not sell hamburgers anymore, all kinds of crazy ideas about what the Act's going to do to reduce carbon. But we have 28 years to get there, and I always talk about it in those terms. I don't even think I'll be here in 28 years when it happens, but maybe I will be. Well, some of you will be here. We have a while to get there. And I like to think of it in terms of really planning an implementation phase that slowly gets us to where we need to be. Plus, don't forget, markets are changing. There's many more electric cars for sale today than there were 10 years ago, and there'll be a lot more in 10 more years. So the market is changing. We'll begin, what we do at our homes will change, transportation will change. The national evolution of change leading to carbon reduction will assist in the implementation of the Act. But there are other things that the Act does that are really important to me. One of them is it's going to create an online dashboard for the public so that you can go see to what extent we're actually meeting those goals for reducing carbon in the Rhode Island economy and environment. And that's where the enforceability of the goals comes in, because if we're not really getting to the goals in the Act in terms of the reduction plan, then this Act does have the capacity to enable citizen suits. There was a lot of opposition to citizen suits when we debated this bill. There was a fear that the environmental community would go crazy and bring all these lawsuits against the state government. We've had lawsuits in environmental laws since the Clean Water Act 50 years ago, and it has not really been abused. There's also a similar act on the books in Massachusetts for about 10 years, and only one lawsuit has come up in the state of Massachusetts. However, don't forget, we will have the capacity to sue as individuals if the goals of the act are not met. Another important aspect of the act is that it requires the participation of the environmental justice community, which is something that I'm really very committed to. It requires that the state agencies that are enforcing this law, that they must engage members of the environmental justice community. I passed a bill. We have several organizational processes that are implementing the act. There's the Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, which is made up of representatives of most of the state agencies. Then we have an advisory board to that, which Sheila chairs. We're very fortunate to have Sheila chair that. And then we have another advisory board on science and technology, who are really responsible for laying out the plans to get to the implementation of Act on Climate. And I passed a bill this year to require participation by a member of the environmental justice community on the advisory board, which is a step to guaranteeing that we're engaging that community. The act also requires working with municipalities, because it's not only at the state level that we need to do the work that we need to do. Municipalities need to be more engaged, and that work is basically unfolding now, how to communicate and enable municipalities to meet the goals of the Act on Climate. That's definitely going to take 28 years in some municipalities, but that's another goal that we have. It also requires working with organizations, academic institutions like this one, to engage them into implementation of the Act on Climate, so that we can have the smartest and brightest minds in the state assisting state agencies and the EC4 and the advisory board in the implementation of the Act on Climate. Now how are we going to get to implementing the Act on Climate? How do we pull this apart? There's a lot of things that need to be done in order to reduce carbon. There's lots of things that need to be done. First of all, we need additional funding at the state level. And there is some money in this year's budget, which I won't go into now, that's going to pay for some increased staff. It's going to pay for some heat pumps for low-income families and renters and homeowners. There was some money in the budget to begin to take steps to reduce carbon in Rhode Island. There are other aspects that we need to keep on the table when we talk about reducing carbon. We need to do more work on our transportation sector, and other speakers are going to speak to some aspects of this. There's the transportation sector that needs to be dealt with. That's the largest contributor of carbon in the state. We also have buildings and apartment buildings, and they're the second largest contributor of carbon in the state. So as we move forward over these 28 years, we need to take a serious look at our transportation systems, at our building regs, at our zoning regs, to make sure that as we go forward, we are building in systems that are reducing carbon to get to that zero carbon by 2050. Green building requirements. Electrification is also another issue, because we're going to have more reliance on electricity as people move toward increased heat pumps, as we move toward vehicles. We're going to have a need for more electricity, which is going to require more investments in solar and offshore wind, which we're making on the offshore wind. We just signed some legislation to do that. So I'm flagging those few things because we need to look holistically at enforcing the Act on Climate. It's not just, the most important part is reducing carbon in 28 years, that's without a doubt. But it spills over into a variety of areas of our lives. I also personally believe, and I hope to see if we can do this in the next 2 years, that we really need a public relations campaign on this act. The Rhode Island public, the business community, the municipalities, they need to have more information about what the statute actually requires. And it would be my fancy that we embark on some kind of a communication strategy where we have billboards up on Route 95 that say that, so that people can really understand that, yeah, this is an ambitious goal, there's no doubt about it, but we can get there. We can get there if we're strategic, if we focus on the areas where we actually want to reduce carbon, if we engage a variety of sectors, municipalities, the business community, the environmental justice community, and we all get on that page, we can get to zero carbon by 2050, and I'm very confident about that. So I'm going to stop there, because that's an overview of the act, and I'm going to turn it over to the other speakers that are going to speak about concrete ways to implement act on climate.
Thanks so much, Lauren, and thank you for your leadership in the General Assembly that helped pass the Act on Climate in the first place. It was so many years in coming, but it is because of your dedicated leadership and relationship building that you done this for So I'm Sheila Dormody. I'm the Director of Climate and Cities Programs for the Nature Conservancy, as Tom mentioned earlier. Thank you. I also get to be the chair of the EC4 Advisory Board, that state advisory board that helps the state agencies, helps with two-way communication back and forth to the state agencies who are responsible for implementing the Act on Climate. And noteworthy, because I'm going to talk to you about the Municipal Resilience Program here today, I'm also the former Sustainability Director for the City of Providence. I got to do that for 4 or 5 years, and the primary takeaway from that is my enormous sympathy for municipal leaders who are trying to work in this space. I do really appreciate all of that work and how hard it is to navigate and get things done. But I've been asked to tell you about the Municipal Resilience Program, and I said yes quickly because you are all the people that I want to help make this program be successful. So do not be surprised when I try to enlist you by the end of these remarks in the work that we are doing. So the Municipal Resilience Program, or the MRP, evolved out of the Resilient Roadie plan for the state. When then Governor Raimondo created the position of the Chief Resiliency Officer, Horbert took the job, and he was charged with creating a plan to help Rhode Island become resilient to climate change. So while Lauren was talking about the primarily mitigation aspects of stop digging the hole, stop making this problem worse that we need to do, we also know that the impacts of climate change are already with us here, so we also have to deal with that reality. And the MRP is one of the tools to do that. And I'm guessing many of you in this room participated in one of the many roundtables that were held around the state to be analyzing like what do the climate change impacts look like right now, what are the actions that we need to do that helped create the Resilient Roadie Plan. But the Resilient Roadie Plan dealt with these 4 aspects of resilience. And primary among the takeaways was that municipalities are bearing the brunt of many of the impacts of climate change, that it's their property, it's their people, it's their services that are deeply impacted by climate change, and by and large, we didn't have a good grasp on what the problem was, and municipalities didn't really have the tools to be solving those. And so we created the Municipal Resilience Program to answer a couple of questions that kept coming up. You know, as the Chief Resiliency Officer, the Infrastructure Bank, were going to municipalities and saying, you know, what do you need to become resilient, and how can we be helping you? Any town official would be able to tell you quickly, we're going to need more money. To which the Infrastructure Bank, and maybe some of you have heard the story because it's oft repeated, would say, you know, it's all right, so how much money do you need? What do you need to do? And they're like, well, I don't know, but it's going to be a lot of money and we got to do a lot of things. But with the MRP, we're helping to answer those 2 questions. What do we need to do and what's it going to take to get there? And the results of being able to create this pipeline of project and start putting a dollar figure on this work are multiple. One, we can get our hands around the problem if we can identify what it is, but it's also helping us to be better advocates at the state and federal level to make sure that we're attracting the funding that we need to be able to do this work. So that's the MRP. So the process that we use for municipalities to be able to identify these priority actions are municipalities apply to the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank to be part of the program. Once they're accepted, the Nature Conservancy coordinates a workshop process with that community. And we start with working with the leaders in that community to identify the core team, like who are representative stakeholders who are going to be able to, navigate this process for the municipality. We compile the existing resources because even though we have a long way to go, we're not starting from ground zero in any of our communities. We have comprehensive plans, we have hazard mitigation plans, various analyses and maps of communities that we're able to start by analyzing what do we know already about how we are on our journey towards better resilience. And from that, we also identify what are the top hazards that are facing any particular community. Is it flooding? Is it sea level rise? Is it high heat? Is it hurricanes? What are the top issues that are going to be climate threats to this community? So then, as we're coming together in a workshop with a larger group, usually a few dozen representative stakeholders from the community, we're able to identify what are the strengths in this community, what are the vulnerabilities in this community across three major areas. So infrastructure, environment, and social. So roads and bridges that are vulnerable, the buildings that are in the way of hazards would be in the infrastructure category. In the environment category, you might have a salt marsh that's providing really important protection and needs to be protected itself, or you might have a heat island that is causing more vulnerability in the space. And from a society perspective, you might have a significant elderly population or an environmental justice community, groups of people who are particularly vulnerable to climate impacts. So we take all of that information, we identify actions that would maximize the strengths and reduce the vulnerabilities, and prioritize those into a report of key findings from each community. So what did we learn from this particular community about what we need to do? And the incentive for any community to participate in this process is that once they have that report of priority actions, they're able to apply for funding from the state, from the infrastructure bank, to be able to start implementing those projects. And with many of these projects, it takes a little bit of money to make a little bit of money, and so being able to leverage a grant from the state can often attract other federal funds or other opportunities to be doing these projects. And I have to say that mitigation and adaptation often overlap with each other in the climate space. By building up this deeper understanding of all of the actions we're going to need to take as Rhode Islanders to become more resilient to climate change impacts, for me, also helps make a compelling case for why we need to be investing in electric vehicles, heating, electrifying our heating sector. All of the reasons that we need to stop making the problem worse are evidenced by the fact that we do have so much substantial work to do in order to be ready for climate change. So here's where we are so far in the program. We started with the first cohort of communities in 2019. Now 20 municipalities have already participated in the program and have reports about what the priority actions are in their community. We have 6 communities who are signed up to be going through this workshop process so far in 2022. With the rest of the communities that are not color-coded here yet, are not on the list, our plan is to complete all of those communities by the end of 2023. So we are upping our game, as evidenced by TNC also hiring a municipal resilience program coordinator. Kai, raise your hand. Kai is our new staff person who's full-time, helping to do that recruitment, helping to organize these workshops to make sure that we can get all 39 municipalities to be participating in this program. So I'm going to leave this up for a little while. I talk about various things so you can find your community on here, because that's going to be important in just a moment. So what I want to tell you is a little bit about what's new in our program for 2022, besides accelerating the pace that we're making our way through this workshop. One of the things that we've seen is that even as we've identified priority actions, municipalities are not necessarily ready to take those actions and put them into a grant proposal that's ready to attract funding for them. So how do we get from concept to design to implementation? There's still a gap at the municipal level. So the infrastructure bank has hired on a consulting firm, Weston & Sampson, that's going to be able to do a little bit more of that technical assistance with municipalities to make sure that they're going to be able to make the most of the end product, the report that they're getting at the end. The infrastructure bank has also hired their first regional coordinator for Atlantic Highland. I haven't met you yet, if you happen to be in the room. Okay, so Paige Naya is the new resilience coordinator, and so her job is to be able to coordinate with stakeholders, provide more technical assistance, think about regional solutions, and advocating for nature-based approaches to promote climate resilience. There's also, we're giving thought now to this idea that even as we have all 39 municipalities in Rhode Island participate in these community resilience building workshops, raise your hand if you think we're going to be done defining what needs to be done for resilience at the end of 2023 if we do that. Great, no hands went up. It's going to be a lot more work still to do. And so we're thinking about what are the other ways that we would want to provide this, implement this approach of workshops to be identifying priority action projects. So I think there's some more regional opportunities to be doing that with combinations of municipalities, or with, for instance, the Department of Transportation or RICTA both have a lot of assets scattered across the state in ways that are vulnerable for climate change. Those are some of the things that we're thinking about. And lastly, very exciting is that the budget proposal that has passed the General Assembly and will be on the ballot in November includes $16 million for the state to be providing more grants for the Municipal Resilience Program communities. So the economy fund, which brings us to what we want from you. So depending on where you live or work on this map, there's a way for you to get involved in your community's Municipal Resilience Program workshop. If you're already done, read the report. It's on the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank's website, which I'm going to put on the slides. Somehow that didn't make it in here, but Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank Municipal Resilience Program. Quick Google search will get you to there. You'll see all of the reports posted online. Take a look at the actions that are on there and think about ways that you or your organization could help implement the projects that are listed in there. If they are more compelling to funders because they're listed as a priority action in the report, and that I think could help to attract more energy towards them. If you're on the 2022 list, contact your municipal planners or other town leaders and say you want to participate in the stakeholders group to identify those projects or send in your project ideas for your community. And if you are in the gray area on the map here and your community hasn't done it yet, that's a good time to talk to your town leaders about participating in the program and asking them to apply to the infrastructure bank, or setting up a conversation with us to talk about what that means for them. And lastly, please support with all of your resources, all of your networks, tell everyone, support the Green Economy Bond this year. $50 million total going to all sorts of good projects, but including $16 million for the Municipal Resilience Program. I'm going to pass it to my colleague on the EC4 Advisory Board, Sheila, who's also been a real champion in the Municipal Resilience Program, has facilitated several of our workshops and helped to identify some of the key projects. So thank you, Pam.
My name is Pam Rubinoff. I work down on Narragansett Bay campus, very lucky to do that, to go to that office each day, and also get an appreciation for what's going on the shore. And so one of the programs the program I'm going to share with you today is called My Coast, Snap the Shore and Track the Change. And for people who have been some of our volunteer monitors and submitted some photos. Okay, well, maybe by the end of today, you would like to become a citizen science and community monitoring. This is a program that we've had formally since 2015 with University, Rhode Island Sea Grant, Save the Bay. I see one of my partners there, Wenley, Coastal Resources Management Council, and this year we brought in Clean Ocean Access. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But right now we have over 800 people that around the state that have signed up, and there are many, probably around 300 active users of this. And it's really a crowdsourced portal, accessible to all, of photos that start to show issues related to flooding from storms, from sea level rise, and damage and erosion. So we'll just talk about that and really focus on what different municipalities are doing with this information. So just as context, most recent NOAA sea level rise report looked at the fact that we do have rising seas. We've had around, since 1920, we've had almost a foot here in Rhode Island. And if you think of that future, so in the past 100 years we've had a foot, and now we will very likely have a foot to a foot and a half by 2050. So it is accelerating, and this is based on the most recent science that is pretty, they look at this as really something, it's not pie in the sky, this is in the system, this is baked in the system. So how does that start to affect us? I don't know if any of you were down at the shore the past couple days with our full moon, but the high tides were around a foot and a half. I think I even saw 2 feet in Providence higher than what a normal high tide would be. So that's a concern. So if you start to think about that in 30 years, by 2050, we're going to be seeing that daily. So that's one of the messages here. The projected high tide days that we're seeing here is, so by that 2050, we're going to see 40 to 125 of those, of the extended, the more extreme high tides. So that's really quite frequent. So what is that going to do to our community? This is just an overview of where we have our heat map of where we see all of our different photos. On the left, you see king tides, what we call these extreme high tides, that are higher than normal. And then here, storm damage. And so after a storm, we encourage people after a storm to go out and look at the damage and take photos. And so this is a database that is then available to all of you as municipal decision makers or state leaders. So this is in Jamestown, right there, right downtown, and they've been starting to see, very much acknowledge how high they're seeing these waters come more frequently. Most recent, this came out in, this was in May. So here, this is the NOAA tide gauge. So these photos are linked to information, to the tide gauge. So this tide gauge is showing us that that tide was 1.7 feet above mean high water. So that is what we could expect during high water in the future, or more frequently as we're going forward. So this is definitely tied to that. It's also tied to weather data. So on some of our storm information, we could see what the wind was. We could see what the precipitation was. Precipitation. Some people who are in Burrville or Johnston say, I don't have a coast, I don't have to worry about it. We're starting to try to see how we can use this for urban flooding as well, because we do have river information and precipitation. So if anybody's interested in trying to pilot that with us, that might be something for us to explore with you. So what is the community doing about this? This was a group of neighbors, I can't remember the neighborhood, it's right there downtown, and they got an art grant. And you can see there all of those rocks. That's what the rack line will look like in 2050 if you have sea level rise plus a small storm. So this is their way of starting to build awareness and have communication in the community. So right there, right here, probably behind where I'm standing is where that photo was taken. Here in Common Fence Point, at the tip of Portsmouth, this is a ball field. Ferguson here has been working with us on this as well. This ball field is being flooded consistently at king tides to the point that you could start to see some of the salt marsh grasses growing. But what do? They mow it. So we've been working with the community to really say, well, this is what the wetland is trying to move landward. Can we move that mow line? At first it was like, yeah, let's do that, that makes sense. And then people are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to lose our ball field. I don't want, and then they're concerned about the Phragmites. Well, that start moving it. So this is an education time. But right here on this side, Storm Tools, which is our state database of looking at sea level rise and storm projections, you could link directly from my coast to Storm Tools. So this arrow right there shows that is like right there on the cusp of 1 and 2 feet. So you can see that the photos really link with the storm tools. This was a 1.7 mean high water. So really useful to then validate some of these maps and then use them interchangeably to say, look at what this will be like in the future. This also is in Common Fence Point. They were concerned there about their coastal bluff, and so you can see that it's a shallow area that that storm can come over the bluff there, the small bluff. Or what we very much acknowledge is that stormwater is coming down. So either way, it's eroding. So the community got together, got a grant, small grant, working with Save the Bay and ourselves, and they've been planting to really look at how to increase their resilience for that. And so here's a green infrastructure approach to that with habitat, et cetera. City of Providence, some of you may have seen this. This is down at Water Place Park. 1.6 mean high water. This happens on a regular basis. They have to close the hurricane barrier sometimes if they're having a water fire event there to just be a tidal barrier. So the City of Providence has a plan out there to elevate many of the walkways around Water Place Park. And then there's a group of stakeholders called the Providence Resilience Partnership, and it's a nonprofit that's really working to look at resilience all around the city. So these images help with a lot of that, to help communicate for these decision makers. Rights of way. This is at Van Zandt Pier in Newport. This is an area that is used by the entire community. A lot of the community members from the frontline community there in the north end use this area for public access. This is a right of way. So we've teamed up with Clean Ocean Access, and they're volunteers that go out and monitor 50 right-of-ways on Aquidneck Island are now looking at these kinds of issues. So we could start to see how public access and sea level rise and storms intersect, and that's really important for community planning and what will happen in the future there for access. I have a lot from Common Fence Point. This one is an inland area. This was all precipitation. This was identified by the community in their municipal resilience plan as one of the top priorities, because you have a community of 700 people. This is the evacuation route. So these photos were actually used to help them get a grant through the municipal resilience plan, program. And that program then supported green infrastructure in this area to reduce flooding. They are still monitoring this because they're still seeing some challenges. So the importance of pre and post construction is really important here. Neighborhood issues in Lawrence community of Newport, down there at Wellington Ave and the 5th Ward, as they call it, down by King Park. Huge issues with flooding, with or without rain. I've heard from the city that they are that they've taken some steps to do some tidal flaps so that the tide doesn't come in with storm. The neighborhood doesn't know that. So we're trying to plan a neighborhood meeting and really start to work with them to have that two-way communication. These are all, so we have several community members in that area. So we're trying to get neighborhood groups together so that they can start to monitor it, and then we can help to provide the data back to them. North Kingstown, Brown Street, this is one of our oldest ones that we've been working with, and they have funds that they are going to be doing some green infrastructure down on Brown Street there. And finally, some of you may have heard about Warren. This is Market Street, and several years ago, probably around 2015, they started taking these photos. And lo and behold, now they have this awesome program that they're looking at rezoning the area, doing managed retreat, taking some of these buildings out of the flood area, bringing them up in the inland, which is that area called Metacom, which is envisioned here. And it's just, I was just talking to the town manager, she said she has her police now sending in photos of what's going on around town. I said, let's put them up on My Coast, you know, because it's a database that then is useful for everybody. So this is where I end with you. We encourage more volunteers. I am going to, this is a video here on the My Coast site, and I have a handout that I'll leave here. And in August 10th, 11th, 13th, we'll be seeing them, and then in September we'll start to see nor'easters and that season. I'm also going to send around a piece of paper here. If you have a hot spot or an area that you're concerned about, just write it down and where it is. And if you in particular would like to get involved or just want to know information, write an email there and we'll send you a note. But anyway, you could get that here. You could use a QR code to get there. And many of you are local decision makers. There's a survey up on mycoast.org-Rhode Island. We just put it up yesterday. And if you are somebody that, you know, we would love your input on how can we serve you better by how can these photos be more available? Are there spots that we should be monitoring? What can we do to support the municipalities writ large? And that's municipalities, which mean nonprofit and for-profit. How can we help the communities with these? So please take that survey if you're interested, but otherwise let me know. We're very excited. I have one of our interns back here, Sarah Schechter, who has been, she's a communications specialist within her graduate program, and so she's been learning a lot and sharing a lot with us. So, thank you. Chuck. Now, Chuck's going to give us some real reality of what's going on in this thing.
When the rubber meets the road, probably.
Right.
I gotta tell you, no one was more surprised to be asked to be on this panel than I was. I really wasn't sure what I could bring to the table. Because where I work in DM, I'm a deputy administrator in the Office of Water Resources in DM. It's primarily regulatory. We are reviewing and issuing decisions for permits for land use and for land changes. Although we have an air resource division in DEM that deals with carbon emissions and those kinds of limits, and we have land acquisition projects and other things certainly related to climate change. We don't do a lot of things about sea level rise, that's mostly CRMC, but I'm kind of going to bring this conversation a little bit inland now, where we are dealing with it, where we are seeing the problems with climate change and resiliency issues. So many of the rules within the Water Resources Office that we have, they're not specifically intended to address climate change or resiliency, right? They're there to protect the water resources and the various functions and values that these water resources provide to our state, be it wildlife habitat or recreational environment, or clean water, which is, you know, water is life, right? We heard that this morning. However, there is a lot of that climate change idea and resiliency that is cooked into those rules, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today. New wetland and waterway crossings. You know, it's a very common type of application that we have. Somebody wants to cross a wetland or a stream for their driveway, or DOT has a roadway project that they want to get across a wetland. We are looking, you know, certainly you want to be sure that you're designing that roadway so that when a storm comes along, that water can make it under that roadway without destroying the roadway, that those culverts or bridges are appropriately sized. They look at rainfall amounts, and what we generally use in our rules are, we use design storms that, with data obtained from Cornell's Northeast Regional Climate Center. If you've never heard of the Northeast Regional Climate Center and want to see a lot of great information on the effects of climate change and how different areas of the country are experiencing that, definitely visit them on the web. As it happens, most of the roadway crossings that we see are already designed to accommodate those storms and more, because we are actually more focused on wildlife passage. So we want to be sure that when you're crossing a wetland, that the wildlife that is using that wetland as a travel corridor for migration or dispersal or just simply looking for food, they're not going to do well if it's just a tiny culvert. They're probably not going to do well if the culvert is even properly designed for the storm. So what we tend to see are larger culverts and bridge designs for those crossings. So that resiliency, we hope, is a little bit cooked into new crossings. Replacement of existing crossings is a little bit of a different story, right? And that is where we see a lot of our proposals coming from municipalities in the state, where whether it was Hurricane Irene or Superstorm Sandy or any of the storms that we've had, the floods of 2010, there were roads that got washed out, there were dams that got washed out, and cities and towns are coming in and saying we need to upgrade these culverts. Now we have exemptions in our rules that allow certain culvert or bridge replacements to be done without a permit. But generally, those require that those culverts remain the same size. Doesn't really address resiliency. Doesn't really allow the municipality, just without coming for a permit, put a culvert that might be better able to handle that runoff. And we recognize that, and we're thinking about different ways to address that. And if you're a municipality coming in for one of those crossings, the main thing to recognize when you're coming in there to change that size of that culvert is it's going to change the flow dynamics even for normal runoff flows upstream and downstream of that culvert. Maybe that culvert is acting as a flood control device where it's metering out water and allowing that water to flood a little bit upstream so that it isn't flowing downstream. If you all of a sudden replace that and make it larger, reduces that issue upstream, potentially could result in damage downstream if you're allowing more flood waters to go a little bit quicker downstream. And so it's an engineering problem. They have to go in there and have an engineer properly design that crossing to make sure that those changes are not going to result, for example, in somebody's house getting flooded that didn't get flooded before. So those are the kind of issues that we're looking at when we are reviewing those existing crossings and replacing those existing crossings. Stormwater treatment devices, stormwater ponds, infiltration basins, all of those things. They use the same rainfall amounts that we get, that we use for crossings from Cornell. The rainfall amounts on the various design storms, 10-year, 100-year storms, the 1-year storm for the water quality volume that we're trying to treat, that first inch and a quarter of rainfall. So it is important to remember or to know that when you're trying to design a stormwater BMP for water quality, it's a little bit different than trying to design a stormwater system for peak flow runoff control or for water volume control. They're two different kind of BMPs, they do different things. And right now they're based on rainfall data that we've used up till 2008, right? Which doesn't seem like that's a really long time ago, but if you keep in mind that some of the largest annual rainfall events that we've had have occurred since 2000. And it isn't just the annual amount of rainfall that we're getting. What we're finding is that storms that we're used to be getting, what basically our stormwater manual is designed to handle, aren't really occurring anymore. We're not getting the all day long steady rain events that we usually would get in the past. We're getting that same amount of runoff in a shorter period of time. We're just getting dumped on. And the designs that we allow and are expecting people to design their projects for can handle that, but they can't handle it as well as if we were using new designs that might treat those peak flows a little bit differently. So what you'll probably be seeing in the future is DEM revisiting our stormwater requirements to not only still be able to treat for water quality, which is very important for our water resources, but maybe change how those designs are going to treat more intense storms, more intense runoff. So, dam safety requirements, dam removals. If you remove a dam, that's going to be a good opportunity to increase resiliency. There are a lot of dams that in this state that are old, and some of them, if they decide to go, can result in a lot of damage. So DEM has the dam safety program that is doing the best we can to make sure that these dams are maintained. And we're also looking for opportunities to, where it makes sense, remove dams to allow the watershed to kind of revert to a more natural environment. I'd like to also say a little bit about buffer zones for freshwater wetlands, for waters, for lakes and ponds. You probably realize, or hopefully are aware that new freshwater wetland rules and regulations that substantially increased buffer zone protections statewide for all wetlands finally passed July 1st. We were really happy about that. It's been a long time coming. It's required a lot of work to get that in place. Many people don't really think about buffer zones in the context of climate change and climate resiliency, but they're actually pretty important. All along rivers and streams, they all have floodplain. They all have floodway. If you have a river or stream that's got nothing but walls, those floodwaters don't have anywhere to go downstream. If they're allowed to expand into a vegetated buffer on either side of that, then number one, the water has some place to go. Number two, shrubs, trees can reduce velocities of those storm waters and allow better, more controlled storage of those floodwaters. Number three, those larger buffers are allowing the wildlife that is using those wildlife corridors a place to escape. You know, if those buffers aren't there and they have no choice but to go into your house or your backyard, that's not as good for them as if they had a forested environment, a natural environment to escape to when in the case of floods. I mean, we're not the only ones that are affected by floodwaters. Wildlife is affected as well. Septic systems, on-site wastewater treatment systems. They certainly have a design setback from a freshwater wetland, right? So that you have proper treatment of that waste before it gets to the water resource that treatment is intended to protect. With all the rainfall we've been getting, those wetlands have sometimes expanded. You know, a wetland edge that was established back in 1980, now, depending on the slope, might have creeped up slope quite some bit. If we didn't have those buffer zones, and if we hadn't had the ability to expand those buffer zones, then those wetlands are now getting that much closer to septic systems and other built environments. It gives us a little bit of a buffer zone for that, for the inevitability of a wetland maybe creeping up slope. You have a little bit of a margin of error because you have that buffer zone. It is not just expanding into a built environment. And I've already mentioned about escape for wildlife, but the other thing is protecting wetlands. It isn't doing anything for climate or carbon emissions, but they're very important for carbon sequestration. You know, it's holding that carbon in the form of trees, in the form of peat and bogs. So those wetland areas are also providing a service to us in taking carbon out of the air and storing it. And the last thing I'll mention, before we'll open up to questions, is we have had a lot of work on combined sewer overflow projects. We've got the big tunnels that are in Providence now. They're currently working on a phase 3 tunnel right now for Pawtucket. What that does is it's taking large storm events that would normally have overwhelmed these combined stormwater systems, sewer systems, so that our sewer treatment plants could not be able to treat them. That runoff will go right into the bay, and that affects recreation on the bay, it affects swimming, it affects shellfish, which is a very important industry for the state. These CSO projects are allowing the sewer treatment facilities to kind of catch up to those storms. They can temporarily store these overflows and then treat them after the storm when they finally have capacity to treat these systems. And that improves water quality and reduces shellfish closures. So, like I said, the water resource rules that I'm actually familiar with, and I'm certainly not familiar with all the regulations in DEM, but those water resource regulations, while not directly connected to or intended to correct climate change, do have a lot of overlap and do have a lot of that resiliency built into them. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today, and I'm pretty sure we'll have some time for questions for any of the panelists here. So thank you. Thank you.
So I have a question and two, but I'll ask you first since you just spoke.
Okay.
Specifically going back to the Horbert engineering that you were discussing right at the beginning. I know that there's very new data coming out of Fish and Wildlife as we speak about culverts and their impacts on freshwater fish. And so I kind of just wanted to pose a question of, when it comes down to someone applying for a permit, do you look at it more, like, do you ever say no? Or is it more of, they're going to do this no matter what, and how do we do it best?
We try to work with, especially if it's a culvert obvious problem. There's a lot of culverts out there that have obvious problems that are actually currently acting as barriers for wildlife movement. Maybe at the foot of the culvert that is eroded away, the wildlife now it's kind of suspended in midair. There's no way fish is going to make that culvert position and jump through it. We will work with applicants as much as we can to ensure that we get a design, they get approval of design that addresses both the hydraulic capacity of that culvert and promotes the connectivity of the habitat, especially for aquatic species, in a way that won't negatively impact flooding upstream and downstream. It really becomes an engineering problem, so I can't think of a single culvert replacement or bridge replacement project that we ever been on. So you have another question?
Yeah, my second question is actually for Lauren. You mentioned something right at the beginning about apartment complexes being one of the leading causes of carbon emissions.
It's actually buildings, and I use apartment buildings as an example.
Right, but it sparked something that I've heard recently about a push in Massachusetts for more apartment buildings being built around sectors of public transport. And I mean, I'm sure we all know Massachusetts' public transport system is much more prevalent and connected throughout the state than Rhode Island. And in New England, we kind of have the benefit of being so connected with our neighboring states that I was wondering if you foresee problems of state pushes like that working in opposition with what Rhode Island their goals might be.
Well,
I
think there's a couple different answers to that. The first thing is that housing is a huge crisis in the state. We see that in the paper every day. The cost of rent, the cost of buying property, building houses. So we're going to be investing increasing amounts of money into housing. And those decisions have to be very strategically made as to where that housing is built and how that housing is built. And that's where what you're asking plays into things. Like, where are we putting the housing? How is it adjacent to transportation? And also, are we incentivizing alternative